particularly fortunate to have these three outstanding panelists who really need no introduction, but I'm going to give them one anyway. So our first panelist is Beth Harbin, and Beth is waving at us right now. Beth is the Senior Director of Communications at Southwest Airlines and leads a department that has won such awards as the Lone Star Award from the Texas Public Relations Association and Corporate Communication Team of the Year designations from both PR Week and the North American Excellence Awards. Beth has more than 25 years of communications experience, having worked in account service for both advertising and PR agencies before joining Southwest Airlines. Her teams lead the communication of Southwest Airlines for more than 60,000 employees. That includes corporate blog, social media channels, executive platforms, corporate social responsibility, and content planning across 50 or more channels. Beth is a St. Louis native, graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder School of Journalism and Mass Communications. She's a past chair of the board of directors of the North Dallas Chamber, and she's a graduate of the Arthur Page Society's Next Level Leadership Program. Beth proudly lives in the historic M Streets of Dallas. Beth, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Our next panelist is Creighton Webb. Creighton is the owner and chief executive officer of SunWest Communications, a Dallas, Texas-based public relations and public affairs firm. Previously, Creighton was the vice president of corporate communications and corporate social responsibility for Mary Kay, Inc. In his 12 years with Mary Kay, Creighton launched the company's CSR strategy, Pink Changing Lives, evolving its philanthropic efforts into a strategic multi-platform program with a global reach. In addition to his CSR and sustainability work, Creighton also led the company's global media relations, public relations, and crisis communications efforts across nearly 40 markets around the world. Before joining Mary Kay, Creighton served as the chief of staff for Dallas Mayor Laura Miller, and prior to that was a broadcast journalist for nearly 10 years. Creighton is very active in the community and serves in many roles, including as chairman of the board of the YMCA of Metropolitan Dallas, and he's on the boards of the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the Arbor Day Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Creighton. Creighton, thanks for being here.
Thanks. I need to join Tina and Beth in apparently being on the board of the North Dallas Chamber.
Well, we'll talk about that one next. Well, and finally, we've got none other than Tina Young. Tina is the CEO of MarketWave. Tina is an entrepreneur and brand communication expert who started MarketWave in 1998 and has consistently grown the business while producing award-winning programs for Texas-based brands such as Encore, Baylor Scott & White, and Oryx USA. Her company has been ranked 3 times on the Inc. 5000 list of the fastest-growing private companies in the United States and has been awarded Marketer of the Year from the Dallas chapter of the American Marketing Association. Prior to starting the company, Tina was a principal at GTT Communications, an Austin-based PR firm acquired by Edelman Worldwide in 1998. Before GTT, she was with Bustin & Company, an Omnicom affiliate firm, and the Dallas office of Edelman Worldwide, a top-ranked global PR firm. Tina is a proud graduate of the University of North Texas with a bachelor's degree in journalism. She is also chair-elect of the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce and a member of the American Marketing Association and Public Relations Society of America. So Tina, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So what we talked about was having each of these 3 esteemed panelists give a brief update of what's happening in their world in terms of communications. And then I'll ask them a couple of questions, and then we want to hear from you all. So if you've got questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat feature or send them to me directly, and then we will call on you to ask them. So with that, we're going to let everybody go in alphabetical order. And so I'm going to turn it over to Beth first.
I guess that's where having the name Beth pays off. Well, thank you. So, and thank you so much for the introduction. I've been at Southwest now for 25 years. You know my role on the chamber, and I'm proud to say that Southwest Airlines will be celebrating its 50th anniversary next year. So that is something that's taking a lot of my time. We serve 100 million customers, more than that a year. And so topics like crisis communication as well as reputation just kind of come along with that. Being prepared, having anywhere from a contingency as well as a response plan is super, super important, particularly as we look at things like, I don't know, a pandemic, or hurricanes, or celebrities behaving badly, or and in current times, whether to lean in or not on social issues. So those are things that we have a lot of experience with, because we have 60,000 employees, as Jeff mentioned. We operate in nearly all 50 states and some foreign countries. So, you know, we always have to weigh whether or not we're going to get involved in something. Whether we're going to comment on topics particularly beyond our direct control. Even, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, our little world was pretty contained. If it didn't involve the airlines or going from point A to point B, we pretty much stayed out of it, but that's really not the world that we live in today. So I know we're going to talk about that a little bit, and that can be super, super tricky. So I always advise folks, you got to have some kind of filter going into these things. And I'll just go ahead and share ours with you just at a very high level so that you can think about, so that you can know how we think about these things. You know, does the issue involve our employees? And again, we've got 60,000 of them and they're all over the place. Does it impact our business? And again, operating in nearly 50 states and foreign countries, that's also a lot. Does it impact our customers? 100 million customers. So again, it's very, very broad. Does it match our brand promise? So is what's going on, does it match, or the action that we're about to take, does it match what we say we're all about? So will this either go with or violate what we say our company is all about? And also, does the issue, and whether or not we weigh in on it, does it impact key relationships that we have out there, either with our community partners, governmental officials, stakeholders, vendors, what have you? We take all of those things through our filter before we decide whether we're going to weigh in on a particular topic. So with that, I will send it on to the next member of our panel.
Thank you, Beth. And that would be Creighton. And when we were looking at the alphabetical order, we realized that everyone's name, whether it's first name or last name, lines up this way. So whether you do Beth, Creighton, Tina, or Harbin, Webb, Young, this is the order. So Creighton, you're up next.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, to say that it's been a busy time in the world of crisis communications is probably the understatement of the year. And I mean, who would have thought that what has been all-consuming and has encompassed our lives for the last 3 months, that being COVID-19, from a crisis communications perspective, feeling almost like old hat this week, it's hard to believe. We have gone in advising our clients, backing up a little bit. Sunwest Communications has been around. You know, we got Southwest and Sunwest. We've been around since 1980. We were actually the public relations arm of Tracy Locke Advertising, and then I had the good fortune to come to Sunwest and take over about 3 years ago. We have a wide, diverse array of clients. From corporate to nonprofit to individuals. There's about 31 of us now, and we spend a lot of time in crisis communications, as you can imagine. So a lot of our time around COVID-19 was convincing clients to communicate early and often, particularly with the return to work and businesses opening back up. We would hear time and time again from organizations saying, well, we want to wait until our plans are perfect and are laid out. And our comments were, no, that's not the plan. Don't give up the good for the perfect. Your people want to hear from you. They want to know what you're thinking, even if your plans aren't perfect, it's better to communicate early and often in a crisis situation. But the dynamic has changed, as we all know, since the death of George Floyd, the protests that have followed, as well as some of the riots and the looting. And it is fascinating to watch brands determine right now, brands, organizations, nonprofits, for-profits, and individuals decide what should they say, when should they say it, and where, on what channel. And we have seen a lot of blowback. If you look at even Target, if you look at Nordstrom, or even Nike, an organization that has spent a lot of time, effort, energy, and money in their corporate social responsibility efforts talking about racial equity, tremendous blowback. And so there's the question is are the messages coming across as posturing or as empathetic? Is it outrage or is there action? I've had a couple of friends in the African American community say very clearly, oh, now that you've looted or that Target has been looted, now you're outraged. But where were you when Trayvon Martin was murdered? Where were you even the night that George Floyd was killed? Now you're deciding to comment. And so it's a difficult place for brands, organizations, and individuals to decide when and how and what they should communicate. Like Beth, we have criteria that we suggest to our clients. Number one, are the events that have happened tangential to you, your organization, and your mission? That is a little bit easier in other circumstances, whether we're talking about a mass shooting or a natural disaster. Right now, if you're a shopping mall, is it tangential? Whereas if you're the National Domestic Violence Hotline, yeah, probably. Which leads to number two, if you don't comment, will you be noticeably absent to your stakeholders and those who expect you to be in this space? And the same two examples are great ones in this case as well. Third, is the juice worth the squeeze? This is one of my favorite comments. I've had several conversations just over the last 48 hours with organizations who feel like we absolutely have to comment. We have to say something publicly. And what we're trying to prepare them for is the inevitable blowback, because no matter who says it or what you say or how sensitive or well-meaning you are, there will be some that you offend. And is your skin thick enough to take it? And fourth and finally, and perhaps this is my favorite one and a really high bar to pass, will you be committed to commenting every time hereafter when a similar situation occurs? If it's a natural disaster, how do you comment on the tornado in Corpus Christi, but you don't comment on the hurricane that hits the Florida coast? How do you comment on the mass shooting in Las Vegas, but you miss the one in Paris? So you could spend a lot of time and resources dedicated to comment and sending out thoughts and prayers on social media. But that kind of goes back to my original point, and I'll stop with this. What's the substance of your message? And does it really have to go out to everybody on social media? Or perhaps is it more appropriate if your employees are expecting to hear from you or your most important stakeholders? Sending out or putting up a message right now on social may not be the right answer, depending on who you are and who your most important audiences are. And with that, let me turn it on to Tina.
All right, thank you, Creighton. So I'm going to, piggyback on something Creighton just pointed out. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I know a lot of people have heard that phrase before, and I'm actually a recovering perfectionist, and so I have to remind myself all the time that all the words may not be perfect when we're ready to go, right, to hit send. But I do think that right now in this time of crisis, and you can pick your crisis at the moment, I think many of us leaders have had a crash course in crisis communications, right? So whether you've done it before, you've been trained in it like I have, or whether you just now play a communicator on screen, everybody has had to figure it out. And I do think there are people and brands that are doing it well in Dallas and outside of Dallas. So there's a lot we can learn. And I think it is important to learn in this moment because there's not a perfect playbook for what we are going through. But there are some fundamentals of communication that are quite important. Some of you are very aware of these things, and they're things that you're implementing, but real quick, there's kind of 5 C's to keep it simple. But being consistent, being concise, being calm, projecting calm in a crisis is huge. It's something that everyone around you needs, and emotions are contagious. Being candid, being real with people, being transparent to the extent that you can be. And all of these things kind of result in the fifth C, which is credibility. I think that you gain a lot of credibility when you're consistent, you're calm, you're candid with people, et cetera. So those apply in a crisis and outside of a crisis.
And if I could just kind of dovetail on that for just a second, because that last C, that credibility, is super, super important. And when we're talking about the issue of the day or ones in the past, if you're going to make a statement, you have to make sure that it reflects your past actions. So can you be credible in that space? And I'll be honest, we've had to have those conversations. Can we stand up and take a position? Will our employees call us out on that? I mean, will they say, I'm sorry, that's not exactly what my experience is? Or will our customers call us out on that? So it is super important that you do that little inventory before you go out there and have a firm line on something. It really has to reflect who you truly are.
Agreed.
Thanks, Beth. Let's talk generally about best practices for crisis communications. Certainly in the last several months between the COVID-19 pandemic and the recent protests, there's been multiple opportunities for companies to deliver messaging, and want to get y'all's perspective on what are some best practices, what companies should be doing, and what maybe are some things that you shouldn't be doing.
I'd be happy to start with that. I think a best practice that I am seeing and that I'm committed to, but many of my clients say the same thing, is leading with empathy. In a crisis moment, it's a shared experience. Everyone has their own way that they're dealing with it. There are different levels of challenges, et cetera. But really being empathetic to the moment, and knowing that we are all business people. I mean, we have work to do. We need to be productive. We're figuring it all out with all the technology now that we are using at home or in remote locations. But leaders that communicate with empathy, I think, are doing it really well. And it's certainly a best practice that I'm seeing out there.
Yeah, one of the points I made earlier is frequency, and I think your constituencies want to hear from you, and I think when there's a crisis situation, much like we've been dealing with COVID-19, as I said earlier, it's important to communicate early, and it's important to communicate often, and it's important also not to get lost. And I think this is really to Tina's point. It's so easy, particularly when we're talking to employees about the logistics of work and return and safety protocols, to get lost in the minutia. Those are important things, the protocols they need to know, how they're going to Zoom, how they're going to work from home, how they're going to get back, and where they should wear a mask. But that can't escape the most important notion, which is they want to know that you care about their safety. They want to know that you care about their health and well-being. And I think that's where safety first, that's really the first message that needs to come out. I also think, as it relates to some things that go wrong, one of the things that I'm seeing a lot right now is well-meaning organizations that are wanting to make contributions, either on the COVID front or now on the George Floyd front. They're wanting to be good corporate citizens. They're wanting to make a donation. But they are not thinking about how well is it going to go over if you announce a major philanthropic donation and then the next day have to announce a major layoff or pay cuts or scaling back in bonus programs. And so, the optics of that, and I think that's particularly true if you're working with an organization or donating to an organization that you've never worked with before, your employees have never heard about, because invariably the optics are, oh gosh, you're laying me off, but now that's freeing up money to help other people. And that obviously is a thought that goes through employees' minds that isn't empathetic, but they're thinking about their own livelihood and their own family. So really thinking about the timing of your messages and when those get laid out is critical.
Yeah, and I would say too, and again, I said earlier, it can get tricky sometimes, but you always have to tell the truth, and I think that may sound simple, but it's so very important, even if the truth is not necessarily a happy truth or information that people want to hear. It's important for them to hear it. But also good leadership means that we also, like Tina was saying, lead with empathy. You also have to lead with a certain level of optimism. That we're going to face this, we're all in this together. It's going to be tough, but we're going to get through it. Particularly when you're talking to your employees or your key stakeholders, they need to know that you're not going to just pack up ship, but that there's a goal, there's a path, and your intent, even if that path is difficult, your intent to get there, and what they can do to be part of that process.
Thanks to all of y'all. Can y'all give some examples of crisis communications that have gone well and maybe some that haven't gone particularly well? Any real life examples that y'all can share with the group?
Well, if I name clients, they won't be clients anymore. Let me be specific as it relates to the situation that we find ourselves in as a nation and as individual communities right now. As brands, nonprofit organizations, and individuals are feeling compelled to share their sentiments around the death of George Floyd and what has happened afterwards, the ones that seem to be working well, and this goes back to some of the things that you've heard from Beth and Tina already, they seem to be very authentic, honest, and open messages that are coming from CEOs of the organizations. And oftentimes, there are CEOs who are willing to say, we don't have the situation right. We are not perfect. And this is a reminder that we have our own work to do internally. Because, of course, the opposite is, and we talked about this earlier, the posturing, the we stand with you. I think the we stand with you statement, you've got to be really careful about, because I think the automatic response is, like I mentioned earlier, where were you before? And then second, let's just look at where you stand with us. Let's look at your C-suite. Let's look at the officers of the company. Let's look at your ownership and your employee base. How diverse exactly are you? Let's look at your philanthropic contributions. And I think it's just that fine line. You're really threading a needle right now between expressing support and empathy to the audience that expects to hear from you right now, as opposed to everybody. Even I've seen some nonprofit organizations in the last 24 hours send out by email some very strong, this is outrageous, we stand with you, this has got to change. And I think that's being received with a lot of, yeah, we've heard it before. Why don't you show us first? This is the other comment I'll make. And this is from some Black leaders who have come back and they're being pressured to comment right now. We want to hear from you. This is where everybody's listening. And their comment in a couple of instances, this is not everyone, but that I'm hearing is, you know what I'm going to say. I want to hear from you. What are you going to say? And what are you going to do? What action are you going to take, whether it's the Anglo community, the business community, in order to make real change, as opposed to just more talk? I'll stop there.
And if I could jump in, I think that leads to who's doing the talking for you. Again, speaking from a large company, everybody looks to the CEO, and I've been so incredibly lucky to have such an effective CEO. He's a master communicator because he does lead with empathy. That is who he is. And it's very authentic. But I've worked in past lives with companies that did not have such a gift, and I have friends who work with companies who do not. And so I think it's also important to find out or to determine, who's our best spokesperson on this particular issue, who can come from the most authentic place, and can be the most credible on this. It may or may not be the person right above you. It may be somebody, on the side. If you all have been kind of following along, we actually have a flight attendant who approached one of our customers flying on a Southwest flight, and they had a really amazing conversation about what is going on. And, that customer just happened to be the CEO of one of the other airlines. It wasn't Southwest. And, our CEO saying, things about this particular issue, which he is wonderful, but hearing from her, that flight attendant, and what it means for her personally, gosh, I mean, that's a voice that you really want to listen to, and is super compelling. So the who is very important.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and just add that, some things that I see going well are those opportunities for communication that comes from the ground level or the front line. People that are out there interacting in the middle of it. And I think that when companies give other leaders a chance to have that voice, a space for that voice, it's really powerful. I've seen a couple of our clients that do a weekly leadership call to provide updates during the pandemic. Well, they're allowing, it's not even allowing, but they're having other leaders on that call, sharing their message, sharing their view from their corner of the business. And it's really powerful. And I think the tendency is to think that the CEO needs to be the only one talking. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's actually a better idea to have multiple, voices that reinforce your values.
Jeff, if I could jump back in, you asked about specific examples. I'm going to go back to one a couple of years ago, also racially charged, but it was Starbucks and the situation in Philadelphia where they declined the use of a restroom to a couple of gentlemen. We spend a fair amount of time talking about some of the principles of things that in this particular instance, Starbucks did right. These things sound formulaic, but they're very difficult in practice. Oftentimes because you have internal folks who are pushing against it. Because there are three things that I generally see for brands that do it right in a crisis situation. And Starbucks is an example in this one. First, they take responsibility. And it is hard to get the lawyers sometimes to let you say, we're sorry. Right? I see some nodding heads. But it is very important that message number one, that in some way, shape, or form, you take responsibility. Now, your internal stakeholders, your employees, in some instances, not the Starbucks situation, but in some, expect you to have their back also. So there may be cases where an investigation needs to take place. And so taking responsibility may not sound like an I'm sorry at the very beginning, but there is some message, some element of we take this extremely seriously and we're looking into it. Number two is typically a statement of who we are. I remember Starbucks essentially said, this is not who we are, this is not what we believe, this is not how we behave, and then went in to say what they do believe. So some kind of a statement reiterating what the corporate values actually are. And then the third, and perhaps the most important, maybe not more important than the apology or the taking responsibility, but just as important, is the so what. What action are you going to take? And sometimes brands wait on responding because they don't know what number three is yet. And that's a mistake. in Starbucks' case, they didn't say on day one, within the first 24 hours, that they were going to close for a certain period of time in order to do training, racial sensitivity training for all their employees. They didn't know that, but they did say, we're going to take action. And then when they did know what the action was, they came back and said, we're sorry, this is who we are, this is our plan, and what we're going to do to fix it. In order to make sure that these values are instituted throughout our organization. And I think that's a good case study. Again, easier said than done often.
Thank y'all very much. Last question from me before I open it up to some audience questions. And please, if you have questions, put them in the chat feature and we will recognize you. I want to pick up on something that Beth raised with regard to Gary Kelly, her CEO, and his personality and being somebody with empathy. What are some examples or maybe one thing that you think that Dallas business leaders have done well with regard to communications during this pandemic and during the protest crisis times? Maybe an example or simply stating some kind of communications that you found to be effective.
I mean, I can start, I guess. And it touches on some things that I think we've said. The frequency of the communication, I really appreciate how much it takes to have, whether it's press conferences or webinars or whatever it is, multiple times a week to make sure that folks always have the latest information. I think that's super important. We've done that here at Southwest as well. We had a specific site on our intranet that has only that information in it. So you can still go about your regular business because we're still in business. But there's a special place you can go and you'll always have the latest information. I think that's super important. And I think a lot of our city leaders have been doing that and continue to do that.
Yeah, and I would add, and not just because many of you know I'm a huge Mavs fan, but I think that Mark Cuban, has been honest and open and candid about the crisis, about how he's handling his own organization and considering the COVID times that we're living in, as well as being visible and literally out on the streets in Dallas as the protests and the vigil happened. So I think Clay Jenkins has done an amazing job being handed, a global pandemic that no one had the playbook on. And I think that his honesty, his consistency, his candor has been very good for Dallas. And I think everybody is going to take pot shots at any leader, and it's so easy to criticize when you're on the sidelines, but he's in the arena and he's doing, I think, a lot of good for Dallas as a communicator and as a leader.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tina, that you mentioned the Mavericks, because the first name that came to my mind was Sent Marshall.
Yes.
But I think Sent Marshall comes to mind for a principle that I talk about that really goes back to Southwest Airlines, frankly. And that is this notion of building goodwill in the bank of public trust and making friends when times are good, not when you need them. So Beth, I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, but the truth is that Southwest screws up regularly, right? There are people who have bad experiences. They don't like it. But Southwest has done such a great job of telling its story, whether it's a great place to work or being a good corporate citizen, that they've built up this goodwill in the bank of public trust. So when something bad happens, they can afford the withdrawal. So you're willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think the same is true for great leaders. If you think about what Seth Marshall and Mark Cuban have done with the Mavericks, that's a great example. And right now, especially in crisis, and going back to Tina's example about Clay Jenkins, he is very present. Judge Jenkins has not said all of the right things and all of the right ways, all of the right time, but he was very, very present and has been throughout the pandemic. So he's built up trust and he's recognizable to the community. As it relates to the George Floyd situation and Dallas leaders, I'm impressed by some who I would have expected to say something big early, and have been very tempered and very quiet and very mindful and watchful. Two come to mind: Fred Perpall, who's the CEO of Beck and right now is the chair of the Dallas Citizens Council, and John Alajade, who's the CEO of Access Healthcare and the chair of the Dallas Regional Chamber. Both have been very careful. In fact, yesterday was the first time that John said anything publicly that I heard, and it was on a phone call with the Dallas Regional Chamber. And again, it was very personal. It was heartfelt. It was relating to his personal experience. But this is the situation we're in this week with George Floyd and the protests is different, I think, than any other crisis situation. Whereas before, communicate early and often in a crisis, I'm not sure that applies here. So folks who keep their cool and know when to hold them and know when to fold them, I think that's important.
Thanks very much. Our first question is from our good friend Jenny King from UT Southwestern, also a master of public affairs and public relations. Jenny, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, that took a minute to unmute. Well, this has been fabulous. So thank you, Tina, Creighton, and Beth. It's really helpful for us to always be thinking about these issues and how we put our brands forward. And as we're all talking on would you say the 26th or the 40th Zoom meeting since March 24th, Jeff, we're all going virtual here. And so we want to make sure that we're communicating as effectively as possible. So do y'all have any insight that you've gained over the last 3 months about this and how we can stay connected with our people? And also, even though we're not expanding organizations rapidly, we're about to have 2 interns this summer, and I want to onboard them so that they can have their virtual experience and have it be meaningful too. So I'll just leave that kind of question comment out there.
I have a few ideas on that front that I have worked well for us and that I've seen work well in other companies. So when the CDC came out with guidelines about social distancing, I really wish that the word social wasn't in that phrase. I wish it was physical distancing, because we have to be 6 feet apart and we may be miles apart at our homes, but the social connection to our teams, to our people, it still needs to happen. So, this Zoom world, so to speak, that we're living in, I do think it is so important to try to be on screen. It's just a simple tip, but I'll say, we insist on being on screen. And it's just one more step, beyond being on a speaker phone, but really seeing each other helps. It truly does. The other thing I would say in this moment that initially kind of seems like it may have seemed like a frustrating or a challenging thing, but to me it's a positive that our lives are in the screen now, right? And so you see where somebody lives, there's my staircase behind me. I mean, you see someone's environment. Sometimes they have a cool background that they put up there. But the point is, you might hear a dog, you might see a kid run through the screen, or someone's wife Zoom bombing. But you can really, really understand people better, I think, when you get to know them. And so there's a level of intimacy that we have never had as business colleagues. And I think you can actually use that for good things in your team and in your organization, even as you onboard interns. Having them really get to know your team on screen is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Good comments. Thank you.
Beth, I'll yield to you.
Sure. I mean, I would agree with all of that. And I will tell you that it's a new skill that a lot of our folks are learning, to be quite honest. I don't know, Jenny, but our culture here is very much about in-person. So we have in-person meetings. Our culture has generally been about being together. And when you can no longer physically be together, what does that mean for your culture? So we've had to think through all of that. anywhere from getting the right equipage, so making sure that you've got the right bandwidth and the machines and all that kind of stuff to be able to do it. But then, what is the content that you're driving through that? I will tell you the thing that our group wants the most from these sessions is just the time to visit. It's not necessarily to practically go through something. It's to do what we're doing right now. It's to see folks' face. It's, it's to have a laugh. It's to play a game. And folks are getting so creative, but they want that social time together more than they really feel that they need more time to be informed. They've got that part. They've figured that part. But where they're really wanting us to support is getting them back together in this virtual way. And so that's where creativity can come in.
I couldn't agree more. Actually, this is I'm in my bedroom. I used my office as the virtual background. I'm wearing jogging shorts underneath the tie. I won't prove it. It's funny. I still believe very strongly, as I think Beth and Tina do too, in the power of rapport. And, the business that we're in of communicating is, there's a lot of energy that you get from people in a room. And in many ways, we're just like there's thousands of lawyers and thousands of accountants, there's thousands of PR people, right? So the way we get our customers is really through building relationships. And that is very, very different through Zoom. But so while I think there's energy in our office as we begin to get back together with the right protocols in place, and there's a lot of excitement, the Zoom world has created some huge opportunities as well. We've gone from a monthly team meeting to a weekly team meeting. And I will tell you, in all honesty, for me, that is the best part of my week, to see all the faces of the team. And Beth is right on. We spend 30 minutes of the hour really kind of doing roll call, where everybody shares something different. One week it was, what's your favorite song that's COVID related? Don't stand so close to me, or something. What is your New Year's or half year's resolution? What's your number one Amazon purchase since you've gone to work from home? What are you looking forward to about coming back to the office? What's the number one habit you've developed since working from home? And just that sharing has created the bond. So Jenny, the answer to, I think, your question is one you probably already know. The tactics are all there. It just takes a lot of effort, energy, and I think it takes us as leaders being deliberate to take the time and effort and energy in order to make sure those things and that kind of connectivity still happens.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all good stuff. And we're doing some of that. One of the things that we do is a weekly happy hour on Fridays. And then we have daily 2 p.m., I missed it today, phone calls with our team. And we always open with music. So that is a great conversation starter to see what the music is of the day and what the DJ picked. And it's pretty fun. So it's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny, for your question. Next question is from Matt Acosta. Matt, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Thank you again, Tina, Beth, Creighton. Very insightful and poignant and relevant to what's going on. But the question I think that I've always gotten about responding both to big social issues that are happening from an organization, and then also in a crisis situation, is what happens when your response or just the situation is politically charged. And when you have a social situation that's happening right now, what happens when you respond and then you put out a statement on Twitter, and then all of a sudden you have 100 different responses that are negative about the organization. So you have to come back and amend your response so that you don't lose 100, 1,000, 5,000 customers. Or similarly, when you already have a problem, you put out a response, and now you've waded into a political situation. So a lot of the fear, I think, in responding is just tripping over yourself, not necessarily to respond to the particular situation, but politically. And so I want just your comments on how you might handle that.
And I'm wondering if I can start with that, because I will tell you, we've done it. You know, I think part of this is knowing that you're going to piss somebody off. I mean, you just are. Particularly in, you know, political or social type issues. There's going to be people who are very passionate on both sides. So again, as we've said before, you have to come from where you are and what is the most authentic. We've had situations where we have, you know, put out information or made a statement, and we got a response. I think the important thing there is that you listen and that you say, hey, you know, this is the response we got from you. It made us take a look at, you know, what we said or what we're doing. And this is now what we're going to do differently. We've had to do that often, as opposed to just ignoring it and letting it just continue without your getting back involved. You do have to stay engaged in those things.
Yeah, you know, we really tell our clients, it's the old adage we used to say in the newsroom: when in doubt, leave it out. But that's not always possible, right? Because you've got a lot of stakeholders who are pushing you to engage, particularly right now. So I think proceeding with extreme caution and knowing what you're getting into is really important, to think it through. And now you look at brands like Nike. I mean, they've made a very deliberate decision, right? Their employee base, their stockholders, the part of the country where they belong, they felt it was very appropriate to get involved in the Colin Kaepernick situation. And as I said before, they've been involved in the issue of racial equality for a long time, and kneeling at the national anthem, all of that. And they knew going into it that there is a large customer base that they would lose. And they made a very conscientious decision to say, we're okay with that this is who we are and our most important stakeholders. On the other hand, when I worked at Mary Kay, we were very careful to say all Mary Kay, you know, we represent Mary Kay beauty consultants all around the country who were R's and D's of all kinds. So we're staying out of that altogether. Again, I think this is a different situation that we're in right now, where people are feeling compelled to weigh in. And so it's always, yeah, I think you have to treat your social media audience much like you do any kind of relationship. You know, if you make your wife really mad and you go a week before you're saying you're sorry, there's probably going to be an issue. So you have to treat your social media audience like any relationship, with care. You can't just lob a tweet in every month and think that you're going to cultivate and grow the relationship. But every once in a while, if you're active and proactive and even provocative, you're probably going to step in it. And your corporate culture just has to be prepared to respond and to have thick skin to survive.
Tina, anything you want to add on that?
Well, Matt, I think, you know, it's a very good question, and we all try as much as we can to sidestep the, you know, direct lane of politics. But I think that, like Beth said, if you're coming from a place of your company's core values, and you're commenting on that, that is a good lane to choose always. And you know, kind of running it through that filter. I think if a statement that you make, if you get blowback and all of a sudden it is politically charged and you didn't mean for it to be, I do think there's ways to respond and reinforce, you know, the message of, you know, we value diversity, for example, and here's what that looks like at our company or in the way that we do business, et cetera. So there's probably ways to circle back again to take it away from a politically charged type of point.
Thanks very much. We've got time for one other quick question, so I'm going to call on Alex McGee. Alex, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, so I do websites and stuff. So a lot of my clients have been asking me to, put like a COVID-19 statement at the top of the website, put some pictures. I've seen a lot of websites with masks on it. Watching Hulu, I see a lot of ads like from Lexus where they say, it's a hard time. Our employees are having struggles. They all seem to be saying the same things. And it's so saturated that it almost gets annoying after you listen to it a lot. It's like, yeah, I get it. But also you sell cars.
Right.
the first time it was really nice. I thought, wow, that's really cool. They did that. So I'm just wondering how we can, I guess, factor in saturation and see, everyone else is doing the same thing. How can we stand out from everybody else during crisis communication? That's my question.
Go ahead, Beth.
Okay, well, I'll just say quickly. I think it's very important not to appear like you're trying to sell something or that you're trying to leverage the crisis. I think that's key. I think there's been a lot of people, especially during COVID, who have a point of differentiation, a product or a service that can help people in this difficult time, even if it's an entrepreneurship opportunity. Got to be really, really careful about appearing like you're trying to be opportunistic or leveraging the situation in your favor. By the same token, you don't want to be tone deaf. So as it relates to COVID statements, it almost got to the point, much like it is right now with the George Floyd situation, where if you have to ask yourself, if we don't say anything, do we appear out of touch? I'll stop there because I know time's tight.
Yeah, and again, I think that tracks back to who you are. And is the topic germane or relevant to that? It shouldn't just be a rubber stamp. You don't want to just do something just because everybody else is doing it. It always has to come from an authentic place. We got a lot of criticism for not being out there initially with this is who we are kind of advertising campaign. We elected to wait until we had some action behind it. So there's always that guess of timing. But again, I think it just comes back to credibility and authenticity. Does it match who you are, and is it relevant for you to have that message out there?
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Alex. I think there's a lot of saturation out there from brands about the COVID times and with those messages. And I think as marketers and communicators, we're always helping our clients differentiate themselves. I mean, so with that principle in mind, I think you have to step back sometimes and say, is this the right course to stay on? Do we need to refresh our message? Do we need to change our message? Do we need someone else delivering our message? I think all of those questions need to be asked as this continues versus a lock it and load it and keep it running for the next 6 months.
Thank you all to this outstanding panel. As a token of our appreciation, we will be making a contribution in all of your names, as well as all of our speakers for this fiscal year, to the North Texas Food Bank. So I know that'll make Tricia very happy. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ken to close us out.
Great. Well, when hearing Tina, Beth, and Creighton in action, I hearken back to the actual title of today's event. It was called the Communications Imperative, Your Leadership Superpower. Well, is there any doubt who our leadership superheroes are? Thank you, Tina, Beth, and Creighton, for being here today and sharing such great wisdom with this group of people today. We really appreciate it. We also want to thank our sponsors once again, Capital One, Coles & Thompson, Higginbotham, the Dallas Business Journal, and of course, Market Wave. We can't make these programs available to everybody without your support, and we sincerely appreciate it. And thank everyone here who's on this call today. We can't thank you enough for your interest and your support and your engagement with the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce.